And welcome. It is Monday, 1 o'clock. Welcome to the Deal Doctor live stream. And I think, Eric, you and I should probably start our videos here. You
All
ready?
right. Three.
1, 2, or that way, one or the other. And where's Eric? Here we are. Happy St. Patrick's Day week. So a little silliness for today, but Eric, you can leave yours on if you like. It's very becoming, I must say. And
Keeps my head warm.
keeps your head warm. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about this post closing possession issue that we run into a lot of. And in fact, if you don't think we run into it frequently, we had one on Saturday and another one on Sunday where we had the question raised by an agent that about what happens when something goes wrong after the closing. Friday night, I got a call from one of our agents, and he said, well, the sump pump went bad. And so the seller, who is now in the property, essentially as a tenant for 30 days after the closing, decided that they were going to call a plumber. Called the plumber, had the sump pump replaced, and then the agent called and said, well, who gets the bill now? The seller wants to know who gets the bill. And I said, well, that depends on what your purchase agreement says, right? And generally speaking, the buyer takes over as the owner of the property, but we're going to talk, I'm going to let Eric touch on that. Then Saturday, we got essentially the same question, only a little different, that there was an agreement to leave a generator behind by the seller. The seller agreed to it. But when the buyer showed up to the property, when they took possession, the generator was gone. Now what? Now what do we do? So this happens a lot. We get a lot of questions about this. And I'm going to turn it over to Eric. And Eric, you shared with me a few documents this morning that I'd like you to talk a little bit. Maybe I don't know. I'm kind of feeling I'm done with the whole hat. The whole hat thing. All right. It's up to you. Share those documents you shared with me this morning.
So I started diving into this a little bit deeper, and it's really fascinating to find out how many different post-possession addendums that we have or that associations have. And when you start looking into the fine reading of it, some of the addendums will have it where the seller, who basically sold the home but is now living in the home as a tenant, will be responsible for any repairs or damage, and that they will maintain certain features such as maybe yard, snow plowing, the building, and mechanical systems. There are other documents that we see where the buyer, now that they're the new owner of the home, now they're a landlord, the buyer is now responsible for those repairs. So it really goes back into what document is being used. And number two, you can always change that and have that conversation with your client on who's going to be responsible. We could make small changes in such addendums, or we could simply say, hey, look, we're going to split the costs. But it needs to be written down. The problem is that if we start going in and changing some of the language of some of these addendums, your offer may not be as favorable as someone else's. Therefore, you may not get the accepted offer. So I have to often wonder that sitting down and talking to your client and seeing how much risk that they're willing to assume is going to be the most important issue. Because I don't know about you, but if I'm a buyer, a new buyer in a home, and I have someone now living in my home, and now all of a sudden the furnace breaks, the sump pump goes out, and all these other issues, I'm going to feel like, okay, what's going on here? Why are these things all of a sudden breaking? So again, you really need to talk to your client prior to writing that offer to determine if we do this, if we give a post-possession, are you okay with allowing this much risk? Or do you want our offer to be a little more tougher on the seller? Or do we want to see if they'd be willing to split the cost 50-50 to make it more fair? So the whole point of this is you need to read your contracts. You need to look at your addendums, and you need to talk to your client to determine what they want. Because we can make it so egregious to the seller that the seller goes, well, why would I want this document when this other offer is the same? And they're saying post-possession, and the buyer will take care of all the expenses. Why do I want to now be stuck with any expenses? And it just makes it difficult.
Yeah, it's a very real world problem, because if you go in and you start out as a buyer, you're going to go in and say, we're either going to set up an escrow for you to live in the house afterward. By the time we take possession 30 days after closing, for example, you may have done damage. So we're going to set up an escrow. We're going to have you be responsible for any and all mechanical stuff. If it goes out, the furnace goes out or sump pump, it's all logical. It makes perfect sense to the buyer, and it's completely understandable. But the question is, how does that position you and your offer? More importantly, how does that position your offer with the seller when you're in a multiple offer situation? Is it protecting your buyer? Absolutely. Is it destroying your buyer's ability to get their offer accepted? Probably, maybe, in a seller's
Hey, Don,
market.
the great
Yeah.
thing is you're my client. I protected you, but guess what? You didn't get the house. So
Yeah.
congratulations.
Yeah, instead of shooting myself in the foot, let me shoot you in the foot. So we have to explain, disclose, tell the agents exactly, or tell the buyers exactly what their level of risk is, what their areas of risk are. And I want to go back to the 3 documents that you have, that you mentioned a moment ago. Those are all addenda of some sort.
Yeah, so we have a Southwestern Michigan Association of Realtors document for possession addendum to buy-sell agreement. This is really a post-possession addendum for a seller who sells the home to a new buyer, and it allows the seller to live in the property. This is where it spells out for how long. It also spells out that the seller will maintain the property and also make general maintenance to the property and for any yard, buildings, and mechanical systems. It will say that the seller shall not turn off utilities prior to the time of possession. And it goes through a bunch of different scenarios. The problem with all of these addendums is that, in my opinion, they all have flaws. Now, that's a pretty bold statement for me just to make here, because these are written by brilliant people, right? I guess. But here's an example of what I mean. In one of the addendums, it says here that seller shall deliver any personal property included in the sale, as well as all keys, transmitters, security codes, and owner's manuals in seller's possession. Seller shall not swap fixtures or any other items included in the sale. That's a great statement, right? That the seller's going to deliver keys, transmitters, security codes, and everything. When are they supposed to deliver it?
Yes, exactly.
So when we
Do
start reading these
are they
addendums,
required to deliver it on closing when the buyer becomes the owner of the property? Or are they required to deliver it not before they give up possession?
right? So
Which
is it upon vacating the premises
Mhm.
or upon the true title change, or when you execute the documents at the closing? So I caution agents when they're reading through here prior to submitting that offer, you may want to familiarize yourself with these post addendums and ask those questions, because what you don't want to be doing is doing that later, because it's very simple to add something in writing
Mhm.
to this document saying, hey, we want these items upon closing, or upon seller vacating the home. And then you can initial it, both parties can initial. It just makes it so that there isn't an unknown later down the road, and people don't understand what the expectation is of that seller.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up another one where we get a lot of questions. Absolutely, that one is, we run into that well, when do we give the keys? When do we give the garage door openers and the copy of the condo docs or whatever? And that's a question. So the answer is clarify it. Answer the question within your purchase agreement or within an addendum so that everybody is playing by the same rule book. The question we get quite often is, well, what's the first day of possession? If we have possession 30 days after closing, does that include the day of closing or does it start the next day? And the answer that we've gotten consistently from Gail Anderson and others is that it counts starting with the first full day, the day after the closing is the first full day of possession. Well, some agents disagree with that. Some agents start counting the first day as the day of closing. The problem with that is when you start counting on your fingers or using a calculator, you may end up with a different date, right? So what do you recommend we do, Eric?
Well, first of all, write it down. If you are unsure of when that person should vacate, let's get away from the 30 days. How about you put a date and a time? Just write it in the purchase agreement so that people understand that Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you will be, you have possession until March 31st at 5 p.m.
Exactly. Clarify. Make definitive statements in the purchase agreement. So in the purchase agreement, Eric, in most of the purchase agreements that we use, is there a reference, and I know there is with West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement because you just read it, talking about the fixtures and improvements and so on that remain with the property, and what happens when the seller decides that they're going to ignore that. And you've built in, for example, a generator into the purchase agreement that's there on the property, and for some reason the seller thinks that it doesn't count. Now, what is the recourse here?
Not my problem. It's the attorney's problem now.
Right. We don't have the power to enforce contracts as much as sometimes we'd like to. We don't have the power to enforce contracts. Only courts do. And
Yeah, and let me add to that. I know that was very coarse and unsincere. That's how I feel. But it goes back to so many times I think we fail to talk with our clients, whether you're a listing agent, explaining the expectations of when we close. These are the following things that must stay with the property. Please follow the purchase agreement. Same with the buyer. Buyer, here's the expectations of the purchase agreement when we go into this.
Setting expectations is really important. Now, from what I understand about this situation that occurred on Saturday, the listing agent did in fact go through that with the seller, said, no, you have to leave the generator because we put it on the listing card and it was on the disclosure statement. Oh, and yeah, which neither of those matter, by the way. And it was on the purchase agreement. That's the only thing that matters. But it was on the purchase agreement. Both agents understood it. Both the buyer understood it. But somewhere along the line, the seller just decided that they were going to pick it up and walk off. And while they were at it, they were going to take the TV mounts.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah, so normally when I've had small cases like this, and let's say I'm representing the seller, I really just kind of pick up the phone and say, hey, Don, I noticed that the generator was gone in the TV mounts. I just wanted to remind you, you may have taken those by mistake inadvertently, but the purchase agreement did state that we had to leave those. Is there any chance that you can return those items to the property?
No, not a prayer. Now what?
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I'll let the other side know. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Don't engage your client. Don't alienate your client. I mean, they might use your services again in the future. You're there just to be polite, be professional, say, all you can do is just ask. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day. And then let the other agent know, hey, look, I asked. They're not willing to comply. Your client's going to have to take this to further other means.
So, Eric, you had 3 addenda to the purchase agreement, which could be used. And There was the Michigan Realtors one, GCAR, and then what was the third one?
Yeah, so we had the West Michigan Regional, we had the Southwestern Michigan one, and those both dealt with post-possession for the seller. And then there was another one for GCAR that dealt with possession prior to close. So if you wanted to get a buyer in there before you closed on the property, that was available.
So in addition to those that could be made available to agents to use as an addendum to their purchase agreement, don't we have a tenancy, short-term tenancy?
We do. We actually have short-term rental agreements. Or when in doubt, your buyer could hire an attorney to draft a short-term rental agreement. But here's the thing, that information would need to be available prior to your offer. So that would mean taking some time to understand your market, and whether in your market, when you're buying a house, whether you're going to have to give post-possession to win. And then you're going to have to say, okay, by the way, post-possession means that I want you to sign the short-term rental agreement. I don't know how many people might agree to that. But I do encourage you to look at certain addendums, and maybe there are contingencies clauses that you can draft to help at least minimize risk to your client.
Absolutely. Any more thoughts on this topic before we move on? We got a couple other special requests today, so let's talk about those in a minute. Anything else to add?
No, just again, just be mindful of who is going to be paying for expenses, whether it's a seller or buyer, and you can even write that in the purchase agreement. Seller will maintain the property and all mechanicals, yard and mowing and snowplow. I mean, you could even pull off some type of language from like a triple net lease online and just copy and paste something that basically states that that seller is going to be responsible for for all maintenance on the home.
And I'm not one to plug warranties, but I can tell you that I had a situation where I put a warranty in place for my buyer because the furnace age was questionable. It was, well past its life expectancy. And so I put it in place as for 2 years as of the date of the closing. Well, the buyer was in there for another 30 days. And so as a result of that, my buyer was protected from that furnace going out, and lo and behold, it did within that 30-day period of time. And so
it always happens that way. There's always something.
And I look like a hero for putting this thing in. He didn't want to lose the deal over going back and saying, I want you to replace the furnace because it's like, 30 years past its life expectancy. We all knew it was going to die. It was just a matter of when. So I, guaranteed it for a couple of years for him. And actually it died about 3 weeks later. So he got a brand new furnace out of the deal. So he was pretty happy. But that's another option for agents. When you're looking at something like this, maybe you, instead of trying to negotiate with the seller to have them fix it, or say you're going to be responsible for the next 30 days, take on the responsibility because it's now your home as the buyer, but put a home warranty in place so that if anything happens within that 30-day period of time, that you're covered. I mean, that's just
you're at least going to minimize your risk. So you pay $150 service fee, but at least it's a minimal. You're going to reduce your risk, total financial risk.
All right, got a special request today to cover the coming soon thing. Let's talk about that a little bit for just a couple of minutes. Coming soon is a very dangerous language to put out there. In fact, you should avoid it on anything public like Facebook or anything else. Basically, that's going to be a flag to the multiple listings services and the associations throughout the state because of the clear cooperation policy of the National Association of Realtors. So, Eric, let's go to that first. National Association of Realtors, clear cooperation policies. It says, when I get a contract in hand, how long before I have to load that up and make it go live on my local multiple listing board?
Yeah, so two things. One, What's the clear cooperation policy again? Number two, what, who
You're just
oversees
pulling it
that?
today.
So the clear cooperation policy went into effect by NAR, I think it was almost 2 years ago now.
Mhm.
And this policy wanted to ensure that the playing field was even for all parties of the public. Meaning, when you signed a listing agreement, you basically had one business day to get that home put on the MLS so that all parties of the public and agents would have equal access to this at the same time. What was happening a lot of times is people would get a listing contract, they might not put it on the MLS, and then they would sell it to their own clients, and it wasn't fair. They were showing that it really wasn't fair for the general public to be able to get into and be able to at least provide an offer for acceptance.
So
So
once
this,
you get a listing contract signed, just to be clear about the clear cooperation policy, you have one day.
well, one business day, and now we
One-
need to define what a business day is. This is the great thing about terminology, right?
It's the vast gray area, isn't it?
Well, no, in this case, it's very clear, because
Okay.
it's a clear cooperation policy. So, so the
Okay,
one business, the one
I'm putting my
business
hat
day,
back on now.
right? One business day is Monday through Friday. It excludes weekends and holidays. So if I got a listing on a Friday, I really wouldn't have to have that active on the MLS until Monday. So people could get something in writing on Friday, market it all weekend, and then go live on Monday. But just be careful of that, because you might get calls on Monday from people saying, hey, it's not on the MLS. What are you trying to do here? And you just need to be knowledgeable enough to that when you do get those calls, just explain to them, yes, we just got the listing signed on Friday. According to the clear cooperation policy, I have one business day, which will be Monday, and it will be going live on Monday.
Yeah.
Just so that no one tries to file a grievance against you for anything.
Yeah.
So just be
But you better have
understandable.
it on there before Tuesday.
Correct. Now, unless Monday is a holiday, then you have until Tuesday to actually go
I'm glad
live.
I'm glad we cleared that up. Thank you. Okay, so let's pretend that you don't market the property at all. Zero marketing.
Yes.
Now, how does the rule change?
Well, if you don't have a listing with that person and they say, hey, Eric, you want to list my property? Okay, I can list the property, but you better be very, very careful about that practice, because once people know that a home could be for sale and you don't have a listing because it's not on the MLS, what's going to prevent Don or someone else from going right up to that seller and saying, hey, look, I have a buyer. You want to sell your house?
Oh, yeah,
Okay. Well, bye, Eric.
they can pirate the listing every time.
Yeah, I just lost out on my commission.
Yeah, so.
So don't do it.
Yes, so don't have your friend or somebody say to you, well, if you market the house, if you find a buyer, we'll pay you a commission or something. And so you post on Facebook, coming soon, available now, whatever it might be. And then a buyer comes to you and says, well, I want to buy the house. Well, you have to be really, really careful, because another buyer might go directly to that seller and say, hey, I understand you're selling the house. Let's cut a deal before we get this real estate agent involved. That happens all the time. I've heard the story at least a dozen times this year. And so be very, very careful about that. But I'm going to go back to the other question here is, if I have a listing contract in place, a signed listing agreement, and I choose not to market the property in any way, shape, or form, no sign in the yard, no Facebook post, no open house announcements, no flyers, am I still bound by the clear cooperation policy, which says that it has to be on within the MLS within one business day?
Well, that's a great question, but let's look at the listing agreement. What does the listing agreement state? Did that seller say, Don, I want you to, I'll sign a listing agreement with you, but I do not want it put on the MLS. I want my privacy. I want it to be kept confidential. And if that's the case, okay. But you have to follow the guidelines that are spelled out in that listing agreement. And that really has to come from the seller. I can't come to you and say, Don, hey, look, how about you sign this listing agreement and I won't put it on the MLS for you. Well, that's a violation now because we brought up this idea. This idea has to come from the public that, hey, look, I'd
Yeah.
like to rent, I'd like to have you help me sell my home, but I don't want it on the MLS.
Yeah.
Then you can write it up
If
and you
they
can move forward.
initiate a do not broadcast, if they initiate that they don't want it on the MLS, maybe they have, an ex-spouse that they don't want in the home or whatever. I mean, there are a variety of reasons. But if they initiate the do not broadcast request, seller requests this listing be kept off the MLS, for example, just has to be in the listing contract, then we don't have any responsibility to put it on the MLS. However, I'm going to go back to the question. When we have a signed listing contract, that clear cooperation policy actually doesn't kick in, according to the associations, until marketing begins. So, in other words, you might have that listing contract in your hand on Friday, but you have done nothing to market the property. No sign in the yard, no Facebook, no nothing. Many of the associations will interpret that you can now market that property or have that property signed, but you have to then put it on the MLS on Monday or Tuesday. Once you start marketing the property in any way, shape, or form, that clear cooperation policy kicks in. Now, in practice, most of us go on a listing appointment, we get the signature, and we put a sign in the yard on the way out the door, right, out to our car. So that's the moment at which that clear cooperation policy triggers, and you would have to have it on the market the next day, right?
Yep.
Does that all make sense? Okay. Now there's two other options we have. We have a delayed submission. We'll talk about that. And then we have the delayed showings and offer presentations situation. They are different and they are very confusing. So let's talk about delayed submissions, or as they call them in the Lansing market, coming soon. In Lansing, they perceive that if you have a contract in place and you're not going to allow any showings, you're not going to do any marketing whatsoever for, let's say, a period of a week or 10 days. Generally, it's used to get the property in shape, like, painting or cleaning or whatever. But the delayed submission will not release it to the MLS and go live, as we say, until a certain date in the future, whether that's a week or 10 days, 2 weeks even. But during that period of time, you can't advertise it, promote it, no Facebook, no open houses, no showings whatsoever, none, zero, right? That's a delayed submission, or in the Lansing market, they call that a coming soon. Okay. Then there's the other one, the delayed presentation or delayed showings and presentation of offers. What happens there, Eric? If this isn't confusing enough, we're going to make it more confusing. You ready?
Well, let's start with delayed presentations, because I think that term might be easier for agents to understand. That basically you have a home that's listed and you're saying to the public, we're going to delay any showing or any showings to the public, or any in this case could be any offers. You could have showings, let's say, but we're not going to have the seller look or review at any offers until maybe a certain deadline of Tuesday at 5 p.m. Is that where we're going with this, Don?
Yes, absolutely. For example, in the listing contract.
Do you realize I hate this practice?
Yeah, I know you do.
With a passion.
Yeah, and we're going to explain why we hate it and what makes us hate it. But if you're used to ramping up the awareness, creating some buzz, you can do it, but you have to include in the listing contract, seller requests no showings until such and such a date and will not review offers before such and such a date. The problem we get into is using the phrase deadline. deadline suggests that no other offers can be reviewed after that period of time or submitted after that period of time. The language really, really matters in this thing. And so be very, very careful. If you run into a question about, well, there was an offer deadline. No, there wasn't. There was never an offer deadline. Okay. It just didn't exist. What it said was that the offers will not be reviewed before this period of time. So if the deadline is listed as Monday at 9 p.m., that's not a deadline. That's the first chance that the seller will get to look at any offers that have been written. But if they decide to do nothing with any of them and they get another offer on Tuesday, it doesn't mean that that Tuesday buyer didn't meet the deadline, which, and therefore is excluded, right? Okay. So this whole offer presentation language that's bandied about out there can be really, really misleading and is terribly misunderstood. So let's say that we're not going to look at offers until, we're not going to look at offers until Friday at 5. Okay, that's the first opportunity that the seller is going to be able to review your offer. Tomorrow, you get a monster offer, $50,000 over asking price, cash, no inspections, it's monster. And then you make the mistake. And what's the mistake, Eric? What's the big mistake we hear every time?
My client now wants to accept an offer.
Bing,
And I'm
bing,
thinking,
bing,
well,
bing, bing.
how did your client get the offer?
Exactly. And what's the answer that we get?
Well, I saw this monster offer come through and I just had to share it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And no. There is an addendum. Here we go with another addendum. It is a listing addendum to the listing contract. And it specifically states that by signing this addendum, the seller understands that you are not going to see offers. I am not going to, as your listing agent, I am not going to present offers to you. It removes that whole part of the statute, the occupational code, that says that we have to present offers as quickly as is reasonably possible. And yet agents who have not filled that out and had their seller sign it think that they have an obligation to present those offers, that monster offer, if you will, to their seller. They're not. And what the only thing it does is it puts them in danger of a grievance committee complaint, right?
Yeah. So you end up, first of all, you end up probably getting a letter from the agent saying, hey, did you share my offer? Now I want you and your broker to sign off that you did share my offer. Number 2, I'm annoyed because you basically gave the public guidelines or the agent's guidelines to follow, and yet now we're learning that you didn't follow it. How can that be?
Right.
You put into place a deadline that we don't like to use, and now you just broke your own rules of
you changed the
engagement.
rules after the game started.
Yeah, and of course people are livid, and rightfully so, because you shouldn't have done what you just did.
So the bottom line here about this, whenever you get into delayed showing, coming soon, any of that sort of language, call us, the broker support team, 616-490-0902.
There's one other thing here I want to mention before you sign off, Don, is that if your seller says, hey, they changed their mind, I really want to see the offers, you now need to make an addendum to your listing agreement that offers will now be shown or provided right away. You need to update the MLS language that's saying offers will now be reviewed and responded to. And if you really want to take it to the next level, you might want to let all people who have seen that property, either through showing time or email or something, saying, hey, look, my seller has changed their mind about this timeline of when they're going to be reviewing offers. They're reviewing offers now. So if you'd like to change your offer or do something, please do so right away.
You're absolutely right. There is a
proper way of
process.
doing something.
Yeah, there's a process that you have to go through, and we've been down this road before. You have to change the terms, the amendment to the listing contract, to say that they now are going to look at offers. And then you have to go back and make a concerted effort, a proactive attempt to reach anyone who might have looked at the property during the period of listing. Well, or the non-presentation or the non-showing period. Well, guess what? What if you're sitting back there as a listing or a buyer's agent saying, well, we've got until Friday to see the house. You know, let's go in and be one of the last ones in. Well, that strategy might have just, you know, caused you a problem. Nevertheless, you were acting according to the rules as they were stated initially. So you can't just change the terms of the listing contract to allow offers now and then suddenly quickly accept another offer. You're going to have to demonstrate some attempt to leave the level playing field out there, or else you're still going to be facing a grievance committee. So
Great points.
okay, final thing. We ran into another question this weekend about EMDs. Let's talk about EMDs. So I write in a contract, Eric. I'm the buyer's agent, and in an effort to protect my buyer, I write in there that if we don't come to terms, if the due diligence period, the inspection period, investigations, whatever you want to call it, doesn't satisfy me, if I don't get satisfactory results from the due diligence, I have the right to terminate the contract. And in big bold letters, big bold red, huge font, it says, and the EMD will be immediately refunded to the buyer.
So what?
Yeah, it's unfortunately.
So it
No
doesn't
matter
matter.
how large it is, no matter how many times you say it in the purchase agreement, escrow law in Michigan supersedes the contract.
And
It's
it
that
doesn't
simple.
even matter whether one party has an unlawful dispute to that money, meaning they have no reason to make a claim for that EMD. And if they make a claim or dispute that EMD, it's done. There's nothing that anyone can do about the EMD until both parties either one, agree in writing, or number two, one party sues the other. There are no other options. There's no broker letters because they're going to be disputed anyway. So the final outcome will be either both parties have to come to an agreement somehow in writing,
Right.
or one party have to sue the other. That's it. I wish there were better ways, but there aren't.
Exactly. That's it. We our hands are tied, and especially if the earnest money is being held by a title company, we don't have a dog in that fight. Plain and simple. So, Eric, thank you again for joining. And we're going to put the documents up there that you shared. We're going to put that and post it to this thread. And we wish you all a very. I want to get the nice tilt to it, okay? And we wish you all a very, very.
I'm the joker of this group.
Happy Thanksgiving. See you next
Happy
week.
Thanksgiving. Happy St. Patty's Day.
Oh yeah, that. Okay. See ya.
Bye. Thank you.